So, Amisha, let's talk a little bit about politics. An NBC report on the Harris strategy says she and Walz are making a play in Trump territory with, quote, flannel, football, and pheasants. What does this tell you about the campaign's playbook?
It says that they know that they are getting under Donald Trump's skin and they're not going to stop. The other thing is this campaign is very knowledgeable of the fact that this is going to be an extremely tight race. They know that it's run within the margins and that the importance of peeling away voters within those red districts as well is going to be extremely important. So they are making their way across rural areas. They're also showcasing the alternate narrative for Kamala Harris. You know how several individuals on the right have called her a big city liberal. By going to some of these rural areas, by being open to having conversations across those districts, in addition to showcasing how her plans, policies, and the vision she has for the future also helps them. I think that's huge. To acknowledge that most of these rural areas haven't been visited since the 90s. We're talking about the Bill Clinton era. I think that that's quite frankly really disturbing. And it's very, very strategic that we're seeing this shift, because if the DNC showed us anything, it's that there are voters to pick off. And many of them are going to be in this expansion model that the Kamala Harris team has actually put into place. We have to recognize that there are votes outside of urban centers that need to be received, particularly acknowledging that many of those individuals are the same folks who are aligning on the Swifties for Harris call. These are the same folks who are aligning around the white men for Harris call. These are the same folks who are aligning around several of these fundraising and organizing efforts on the ground. Those people need to be touched.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer, a new Fox poll shows Harris leading Trump with voters over 65, improving on Biden's share, but she still is behind among voters without a degree and rural voters. Trump's support there is about equal to his support in 2020. Are Republicans, do you think, concerned Harris could, in fact, be picking off those important voting blocks?
Well, they certainly should be, because that's exactly what she's doing. And we see the proof of that in the data. We see the proof of that in the numbers. Kamala Harris has brought something to this race that I think really has taken a lot of people by surprise. And we're now seeing it now that she's been in long enough to have a few poll cycles go by. My political roots are in New Hampshire, where, retail campaigning is not just respected, it's expected. And when you see Kamala Harris on the ground in these rural communities in Georgia, not to mention a lot of other swing states, voters respond to her so positively, so openly. She's making inroads in places that Republicans did not expect her to. And I would suggest that J.D. Vance's feigned anger or disdain or whatever it was is in large part in response to the fact that Kamala Harris is, in fact, picking off those Republican voters one by one.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that aspect of it, Jennifer. The Trump campaign downplaying the incident at Arlington National Cemetery. This comes after Trump's Medal of Honor comments. For a campaign that touts its support among the military, explain to us what this is, what's going on here?
Well, listen, Donald Trump has a long history of demeaning and denigrating those who have sacrificed their lives on behalf of our country. This is not the first time that we've seen him go someplace that should be a sacred military place of remembrance and try to turn it into a moment about Donald Trump, a campaign moment. As far as and we're going to continue to see it. We know that is a part of the narcissism that completely consumes him. But it just shows his total lack of disrespect for those who serve, those who have sacrificed. And frankly, the way that J.D. Vance responded is more of the same. Instead of addressing the issue and addressing what actually happened, he tried to turn what should have been a moment about the 13 American soldiers who gave it all for us. He turned it into something about yelling at Kamala Harris and trying to, send her to hell. Completely inappropriate and disrespectful of what the topic of the conversation should have been about.
Yeah, and Amisha, what should that topic of conversation been about, and where do you see moments where politics in general has gotten so ugly, and there's so many times that we hear, words that normally we shouldn't or we hadn't heard in the political arena? I'm just wondering, is that something, Amisha, that just can't be avoided because of who's in the campaign trail?
First and foremost, I think that when we're talking about anything dealing with the military and fallen servicemen and women, the honor needs to go to those servicemen and women who are the utmost of patriots. That's not what we saw. That's not what Donald Trump is known for. That's not what his brand is. This is a guy who makes fun of POWs. This is a guy who skipped military service himself, not 1, 2, but 3+ times. This is a guy who likes to make fun of those who have been disabled from the military. This is a guy who does not believe that people who died in military service are worthy of honor. So I think that there is a lot here that needs to be unpacked. But beyond that, to expect there not to be violent rhetoric, to expect there not to be insidious language, to expect there not to be racism, anti-woman commentary, to expect there not to be anti-immigrant commentary, to expect there not to be this flagrant abuse of not only power, but also leadership from a guy who has shown from day one that he does not care about anybody but himself, but also that he does not respect any of the ideals of the democracy that we all live in. It's problematic, but I think that that is not a result of the political era as much as it is a result of the Republican Party amplifying Donald Trump. And now they're stuck with him. They had multiple chances to get rid of the man, and they latched on so hard. This is who they have, and this has become their brand. You're not going to escape from Donald Trump until you get rid of Donald Trump. The Republican Party has to walk away from him.
And Jennifer, just your thoughts on RFK Jr. You know, RFK Jr. when he announced his support for former President Trump, talked about, you know, team of rivals. How do you think that team of rivals attitude will play with Republican voters?
Well, first, if I could very quickly, I just want to refer back to and highlight what was just said.
Absolutely.
This is not just about Donald Trump. This is about the GOP. It's about the party itself. When J.D. Vance told Kamala Harris to go to hell, the crowd of Republican voters behind him cheered wildly. So this isn't, you can't, I don't blame Donald Trump. I blame the party for embracing him and lifting him up the way that they have. As for RFK and this, you know, unity ticket or this, you know, union of rivals or, you know, however they're trying to brand it, I don't think he really is going to bring anything valuable to the table. I think that they're trying awfully hard. It's kind of looking and sounding desperate when they're looking at the players like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard as being the great example of unity. And you can't forget the fact that RFK's name is going to be on the ballot in a number of states, including places like Wisconsin and Michigan. And he's going to end up undermining Donald Trump in some very important states, regardless of the fact that he has dropped out.
Amisha Cross and Jennifer Horn, thank you both so much for being with us this morning. Appreciate it.